Willkommen in einem folgenden video, or welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 15 of my organisational series of videos. In this case I'll be providing a detailed view of the German TO&E at Normandy on the 6th of June. I'll only be covering the formations initially involved in the initial Allied landing, as well as any other formations which may have been close by. The reason why I'm creating this video is that the research involved in creating the video will be used to create a detailed scenario for a D-Day landing, as well as historically accurate formations for an ad hoc scenario generation system using a card-based system. But besides that gamey type aspect, this video will be fully rooted in historical analysis or detail. So if you're not interested in figure or board gaming, this will nonetheless provide interesting information for the pure non-gaming historian. As indicated already, the focus will be the German TO&E on the 6th of June in the vicinity of the Allied landing. This shows the German deployment on the 6th of June. The main formations involved were the 709th Static, 716th Static, 352 Infantry Division and the 21st Panzer Division. Other formations which were close by but not involved in the initial day are listed here. Examples are the 12th SS and the Panzer Division. While this video will not cover anything beyond the 6th of June, this map shows the divisions which were rushed into combat between the 6th of June up until the 12th of June 1944. In part 1 I'll be covering the formations based on credible information, mainly from Nuts Figure and other reasonably credible sources. And when I don't have any credible sources, I'll rely upon Wiki, which sometimes can be a bit dubious. The 709th Static Infantry Division was a coastal defence unit assigned to protect the eastern and northern coast of the Cotian Peninsula. The foundation regiments were reasonably large, containing 4 battalions each. The German battalions consisted of old German soldiers, and the Ost battalions consisted of Georgians and Ukrainians. The 919th Grenadier Regiment was transferred from a proper infantry division. While all battalions were Germans, they were supposedly undermanned or possibly under-equipped. Under divisional control, there was an additional Russian, possibly Ukrainian, and 2 Georgian battalions, which were equipped with older weapons. The artillery regiment consisted of 3 battalions of what could be being captured artillery, possibly Russian or French artillery. The anti-tank battalion was probably also equipped with converted French anti-tank guns. The division lacked motor transport, and its formations were designed to fight in static locations, which does benefit from some level of fortification. The next division, the 352nd Infantry Division, was formed in occupied France in early November 1943 and became combat ready by May 1944. It was supposed to be transferred to the Eastern Front, but was instead ordered to remain in France. Its regiments were organised with 3 battalions each, which was unusual as most divisions after September 1943 used the 2-battalion structure, particularly in the east. In theory, this was a powerful division, but in practice the battalions were supposedly under strength, or most likely under-equipped, or possibly with inadequate training. The 726th Infantry Regiment was attached to this division, which came from the 716th Infantry Division. This formation was also under strength in some way, shape or form. The artillery regiments consisted of 3 light battalions of 10 10.5 cm howitzers each, and a medium battalion of 12 15 cm howitzers. The 716th Static Infantry Division had no combat experience and was one of the weakest divisions in the area. Many of the division troops were elderly Germans and conscripts from other German-occupied countries, especially Ukrainians. The division also had some young German conscripts as well. The regiments were organised into 2-battalion formations, with 2 regiments containing a Ukrainian Ost battalion. Only 2 regiments were involved in initial fighting on the 6th of June. As a bodenständige or static unit or grounded unit, it was not equipped with standard configuration of vehicles and heavy weapons. Much of the divisional artillery and anti-tank guns were from captured armaments. There was an additional Ost battalion under divisional control. The 21st Panzer Division was recreated in France in 1943 using French vehicles, but before June 1944 it was quickly re-equipped with German equipment, specifically tanks. The Panzer battalions consisted of Panzerkampfwagen 4 Offs H and some Panzerkampfwagen 3s armed with a 7.5cm howitzer. Supporting this was one company of Stug 3s, the 315th Company. The division contained additional AFVs in its assault gun and reconnaissance battalions. The 21st contained 4 Panzergrenadier battalions. I have to assume one was equipped with half-tracks. It was likely the unique P107 half-tracks were used in this case. I have to assume the Panzer Artillery Regiment was standard, with one battalion of SB artillery and the remainder being towed by trucks. It's highly likely the SB howitzer were based on French tanks, such as the 15cm SFH Alsace-Lorraine Schleppner. The 200th Assault Gun Battalion was equipped with French tanks converted into assault guns, such as the 7.5cm armed 39H and 10.5cm armed 39H. Marder 1s, mounted on French Lorraine Schleppers, were also used. The division also used the French Laffy tractors to tow the 8.8cm anti-tank guns. The Panzer Reconnaissance Battalion also contained armoured fighting vehicles. It was likely some Marder tank destroyers were in the anti-tank battalion. That covers part 1, which contains the credible information. I must note I did have a little bit of issues with getting the correct AFV counts for the 21st Panzer Division. One source said one thing and another source said another, so I'm hoping I've selected the correct source. Now, for part 2, I'll fill out the structure of each of these divisions using a standard German TO&Es. This may be generous, but it'll give us an idea of the full detailed structure of these divisions. When reading the accounts, while I did the research here, I often came across the term understrength. However, I'm certain what this really meant. If we look at the 709th Static Infantry Division, one source indicates its strength was 12,320 men. Is this understrength, considering the number of formations in it? In order to answer this question, we need to know exactly what formations were included in this value of 12,320 men. The sources exclude the attached 919th Grenadier Regiment of 3 battalions from the formal structure of the division. Were they included or were they not? The other issue was how much supporting formations were included in this division. As it was a static division, its transport logistic formations would have been rather small, and these normally would take up a lot of manpower which was no longer required. The same applies to the towers and transports of the other formations. If we assume that there were minimal transport or supply formations, no medical battalions, and minimal other troops, and only look at the formations listed in my sources, the division consisted of 14 infantry battalions, 3 artillery battalions, 1 anti-tank battalion, 1 engineering battalion, and 1 signals battalion, for a total of 20 battalions. If we divide this into 12,380 men, we arrive at an average of 616 men per battalion. At 616 men per battalion, we are getting to what would be considered a reasonably full-strength infantry battalion in 1944. I would suggest the infantry companies were probably full strength, but the supporting formations were reduced in strength from the typical 200 to possibly 160 men or so. Primarily, I would estimate, due to a lack of mortars, particularly the 12cm mortars. While there are a lot of assumptions in what I'm making, this kind of indicates the formations were probably not under strength in terms of actual manpower. I suspect the real issue was lack of supporting weapons, such as mortars particularly, and maybe even machine guns. I also suspect that this also applied at the regimental level, with a lack of typical infantry heavy weapons found in normal infantry regiments, such as the 15cm and the 7.5cm howitzer, which is probably not in this particular division. One source I did find indicated the 708th, 9th and 11th Static Infantry Divisions were armed with captured enemy artillery. These 3 divisions were armed with ex-Soviet 7.62cm FK-288 ZIS-3 guns, probably 12.2cm howitzers, ex-French 10.5cm and 15.5cm howitzers, and ex-Czech 10cm howitzers. This seems quite reasonable because even the regular German infantry divisions did often contain captured artillery. For example, the 326th Infantry Division was armed with some ex-Soviet and some obsolete artillery guns. 6 batteries of Artillery Regiment 326 were armed with the 122mm Russian howitzers, and 3 batteries had old 10.5 centimetre World War I vintage howitzers, as you can see here. If we look at the 346th Infantry Division, this was also armed with ex-Soviet 7.62 centimetre FK288 ZIS-3 guns, the 122mm M1938 howitzers, and ex-French 10.5 centimetre howitzers. Moving along to the 243 and 265th Infantry Divisions, both these infantry divisions were also armed with ex-Soviet artillery guns. Artillery Regiment 243's first 2 battalions were armed with 7.62 centimetre ZIS-3 guns, and a third with the 122mm M38 Russian howitzer. When the Germans captured the French anti-tank weapons after 1940, they did use them. However, these were normally converted to weapons which were more effective. I'm uncertain if any unmodified French anti-tank guns were used in 1944 by any of the divisions that we're covering, but if they were, it would have been at a regimental level. It's clear from this picture of captured anti-tank guns the Germans were using rather old 3.7 centimetre anti-tank guns, so it's possible they may have also been using the French 25mm anti-tank gun as well. Let's first look at the detailed breakdown of the 352nd Infantry Division. This division used a 3-battalion regiment, so it was reasonably powerful. It lacked experienced and possibly fully trained troops, and some of its equipment may have been captured enemy weapons with its associated issues, but on paper it was a reasonably powerful German infantry division. If we break it down into a simpler form, only showing regiments and battalions, this shows the structure of the division, with the respective strengths of the battalions shown on the right. Now, the strengths are based on a fairly complex formula, and obviously it's subjective, but nonetheless it gives you an idea of the relative strengths of all the formations that were in the division. And the infantry battalions, for example, were no more weaker in this division than probably any other infantry division in the German army. The only thing it lacked was probably recent experience. When we look at the 709th Static Division, this was surprisingly powerful, at least in terms of manpower. While weak in terms of supporting equipment, it represented a formation with a lot of infantry. This makes sense as this division was required to cover a very large area of the coast, and you needed a lot of manpower covering those areas of the coasts. We can see here the 709th Static Division consisted of 14 infantry battalions with reasonably minimal supporting formations. At least that's my estimate of what it was. This was actually quite a powerful division, but of course it was expected to cover a very long front line. The 716th Static was considered the weakest of all the divisions that I've covered, and I've downgraded its quality accordingly. With the 2-battalion regiment structure, its regiments were certainly weaker than any of the other divisions we've covered so far, but it still represented a lot of infantry which could cover the front line. Its main issue was a lack of training and familiarity with the area it was defending, as well as probably heavy weapons. Although there were some interesting documentaries which showed one formation of this division where it had more than adequate machine guns, but it had a lack of ammunition and a lack of manpower to man those machine guns. So I suspect that there was probably enough machine guns. So if there was a lack of heavy weapons, it would have been mortars and infantry guns. This shows a simplified breakdown of the 716th Static Division. The division was all about its 7 infantry battalions. The 21st Panzer Division, after it was equipped with German tanks, was a very powerful Panzer Division. It did not have any Panther tanks, but the tanks it did have were more than adequate. I'm uncertain if there was a Panzergrenadier battalion equipped with half-tracks, but I've assumed there was. It's likely the half-tracks used were French half-tracks, as this division did use an awful lot of French equipment when it could. When we look at this simplified breakdown, the 21st Panzer Division at battalion level was similar to the official structure, as well as being almost at full strength. While I rarely expected divisions to be at full strengths in most cases, I was surprised how complete or up to strength divisions were that we have covered so far. In retrospect, these divisions were all formed between 1942 and 1943 and have been sitting around waiting for the Allies to arrive, so they probably would not be under strength due to combat. However, in terms of manpower, they were close to their original strength. However, in terms of equipment, the static divisions probably did use suboptimal equipment, or there was a lack of a lot of support equipment you would normally expect in an infantry division. On the other hand, the standard army divisions all looked to be very powerful and up to strength. Perhaps my sources were faulty, but this seems to be my conclusion so far. While this is not the subject of this video, this shows the divisions which arrived over the next 12 days. A large number of divisions did arrive, and these list the divisions going from Cherbourg to Caen. This ends the historical section of the video. The end of the video will contain some gaming material, which may not be interesting to those who are not interested in gaming, but it's rather short, so perhaps you'll still enjoy it nonetheless. The first thing which struck me when I looked at the battle was how I could refight the entire first 12 days of Normandy on a 3x2 foot playing area over 12 game turns using Neuschwerpunkt or the SPI Modern Battles game system. Unit density would be high in the battle, so I would consider scaling down from 1 to 60,000 to 1 to 20,000 ground scale. The original SPI board game would typically change the unit scale when this occurred, but most of the battles they covered were mobile with a low unit density. This was certainly not a low unit density battle. However, nonetheless, it's still viable at its bog standard 1/60,000 scale. For example, in this case, the Germans have 15 divisions in the front line on the 12th of June. This represents peak German unit density, at least for the 12 days. Each division would contain about 10 frontline combat elements, battalions, for a maximum of 150 elements. The front line is probably 60 centimetres long, so the elements would be 2 deep and almost touching on each side. This is dense, but certainly not unreasonable. The Germans could take the option of deploying infantry regiments instead of infantry battalions, and that would dramatically reduce the number of elements. The Allies have about 9 to 10 divisions each of which are much more powerful, and you wouldn't be able to break them down to regimental scale, and you would have a similar kind of density. If you did want to go down to a scaled down version, 1 to 20,000 scale, this is what it would look like. In this case, I would probably need a 4 foot wide playing area by 3 foot deep, but nonetheless the unit density would be much more reasonable. The lines that you see there are 1 foot squares for scale purposes. The other point I noticed was that with a battalion scale set of rules, there may be no need to reconstruct each historical division to create a random set of cards for an ad hoc game system creation system. You simply require a number of infantry division cards, each of which will differ slightly, such as one which uses 3 battalion regiments and another 2 battalion regiments. For panzer divisions, some would have a Panther battalion and some would not. This gives you some variety with your random card deck. For the Western Allies, where all divisions are basically the same, they would differ based on what formations were attached to them. This would also apply to the Germans as well. Of course, if you were recreating a historical scenario, you would need to determine the historical strength of the various divisions. But if you weren't interested in doing a full-blown historical scenario, only wanted to create a ad hoc scenario generation system, there's no need to get into the kind of detail that I've gone into with these 3 or 4 divisions in order to give you your card set of 9 cards. And so we come to an end of my part 15 of my video series on the German divisions which met the Allies in Normandy on the 6th of June. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.